One APIA Nevada is a grassroots nonprofit organization that advocates for policies empowering everyday Asian Pacific Islander Nevadans. Nevada is home to a growing APIA community, accounting for 1 in 10 voters. We are One APIA Nevada. Concili Incorporated is Nevada's premier Democratic campaign firm. Fighting for progressive issues and candidates for over a decade, and proud sponsor of Battle-Born Progress. Tonight's episode of Out in Front is brought to you by our season sponsors, Concili Inc., Nevada State Education Association, One APIA Nevada, Silver State Voices, and Stefan and Marta Schmidt, as well as our episode sponsors, Save Lives Nevada and Washoe Education Association.
With Annette. My name is Annette Magnus, and I'm the Executive Director of Battle-Born Progress. We have a very exciting panel this evening. We are talking all about the Equal Rights Amendment, why we need to make sure we get this done now, and why today is such a special day. So joining me today on the panel, a few returning guests that we've had before. So we have Jeri Burton. She is the president of Nevada Now, the National Organization for Women. We also have Maria Nieto Orta. She is with Somos Nevada. And then we have Tess Opferman, and she is the director of the Nevada Women's Lobby. So ladies, welcome to the show. 3 amazing, incredibly powerful women all across the state of Nevada. So excited to talk to you about the Equal Rights Amendment tonight. So Jeri, I know you guys had a big event this morning. You've been doing a lot of work this week on all things ERA. So talk to us about why today is so important and what's happening today.
Great. Well, thank you for having us. We did have a rally today because it is the 2-year anniversary of Virginia ratifying. And the reason that's important is in the text of the ERA, the Section 3 says that the amendment shall take effect in 2 years after ratification. So that's today. So we consider the ERA the law of the land now. So that's why we had our rally.
So Jeri, talk to me about that process, because I think there's still a lot of folks out there who maybe are a little bit confused about why it's 2022 and we're still even talking about the Equal Rights Amendment, because that should have been done long, long ago, and why it's still so important for people to advocate for the Equal Rights Amendment. This is not just a women's issue. This is an everybody issue. And we want to make sure that all people are, equally represented in our laws, in our Constitution, in our levels of government. So what happened in Nevada, and what has the process been leading up to today?
Great. Well, as I think most people know, but that I'm an ERA geek, so I shouldn't assume. Nevada ratified in 2017. We were the 36th state, and so we're really proud of that. And everybody, everywhere you go, Senator Spearman's name is celebrated because she got things going. So, so then of course Virginia ratified, and it's the 38th state, as we said. So the problem is now. And now we'll get into the tiny bit of the weeds. The archivist has not published. He certified Nevada, he certified Illinois, and he hasn't certified Virginia or published the ERA. So we've been working on getting attention out we need the archivist to publish it. We did have some exciting news today. The president did come out. President Biden came out finally. We've been waiting for a year for a statement on his support. We know he supports ERA. We talked to him when he was campaigning, but nothing has really been happening. So we also had we met with Senator Cortez Masto on Tuesday. She worked on a letter to the Department of Justice with Senator Blumenthal, Senator Klobuchar, Congresswoman Meloni and Spear, asking the archivist to publish. And also, again, weeds, but the Office of OLC, it's a legal counsel, Office of Legal Counsel, when Trump was president, sent out a memo saying that it was too late. And so we've been asking for Biden's OLC to rescind that memo. And today they sent out a memo that said it's up to Congress and the courts. So not quite what we wanted, but movement. So we're excited about that. And then another thing, SJ Res 1 is to remove the deadline. There was a timeline in the preamble, and our Congress people have already passed that bill, and we're waiting for SJ Res 1 from the Senate, and that happened today. 52 senators signed on today. And so, there's movement. We're excited about it, but it's stuck right now, and we need people's help to get attention to it.
Absolutely. So Jeri, before I go to our other panelists, I want to just give some context on what the Equal Rights Amendment does. And kind of the history of why it's so important. Why are we still arguing that we need this in 2022? Like I said, shouldn't have been done years ago. But what does the text of the ERA actually entail? And how would it change laws in our country if it were adopted fully?
Well, it's pretty simple. The ERA just says equality of rights under the law shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of sex. It's not radical. It's not crazy. We do think that it will, have effect on, equal pay, employment laws. A lot of states right now are looking through their laws, seeing where the discrimination laws are and how it'll affect and be ready for when it's actually implemented and published. So, sex discrimination in armed services, and one of the things I think we were talking about earlier is that will this affect abortion? And I don't know if you'll be talking about that, but it's one of the things that, body autonomy, women having equal rights or certainly rights over their own body. So we do think that it'll affect that. And, pregnancy discrimination in jobs. There's a lot of different things that states are looking at that our laws will be affected. So.
And I think it's important to remind our viewers, this isn't just for folks who identify as women. This is important also to folks in the LGBTQ community, specifically our, non-binary folks, trans folks, those folks in our communities are also discriminated against. This is not just a quote women's issue anymore. It's so far beyond that because there are so many different folks that this will include. And that's also why it's important to have this non-discrimination language in many of our laws across the board.
And I think it'll help men because, if you don't make the money that your husband makes more and you can make equal pay, that affects couples, it affects families. I think it's equality for everyone.
Absolutely. All right. So Tess, I want to bring you in. You and I have worked together a long time at the legislature. We did have a resolution, as Jeri alluded to, during the Nevada legislature. Why was that important to the people of Nevada? And, we were the 36th state. We did kind of kick this whole thing off again, which was really awesome and kind of historical. I was there the day that it happened on the floor. So talk to me about why this was so historic and what that meant to Nevada.
Yeah, absolutely. No, it was a huge moment. I think, Nevada, the last couple of years has had some interesting years in politics and has had some interesting years at the state legislature. We've had a female majority, and I think that says a lot. The ERA came at a cool time. So, we all know what happened in 2016 with the presidential election and how that was really hard to handle. But there were some neat things that emerged out of that. And one of those things was a very, very powerful women's march, the first women's march in 2017. And I think, if anything, that started to set the stage for the Nevada legislature that session, and then some sessions after that. I know Senator Spearman and organizations were working on the ERA before the start of the legislature and before the Women's March, but all of that just gave so much momentum to the idea of gender. And I think that's part of what gave it energy so that it could be brought back to the legislature. And so Pat Spearman, she was the sponsor, but there was so much support for it in 2017. And so we were able to pass the ERA, the resolution, being the next state and getting that ball rolling for more states. Of course, the ERA wasn't passed in the 70s. So as Jeri kind of went through the timeline, and Jeri, I think that explanation of how it went down in the 70s and then we picked it back up was really helpful. But it was huge. I mean, we're the first state that started it back up, and gave the ability for Illinois and then Virginia to follow, and now the ability to have it actually be in our large constitution. The other thing that I just want to draw attention to is that the state of Nevada, and maybe clarify some questions here, because the state of Nevada is also working on our state ERA. Which is a little different from the federal ERA that we passed in 2017. So in 2017, we worked on the federal ERA, which Jeri said, and she explained the verbiage in that, which is just, shall not be denied or abridged on account of sex. In 2019, we had a state ERA that was passed, and that's an amendment to the state constitution. And that one's a little bit broader. So I just want to read that to you guys right now so that we can kind of see the differences in the two of those. So the state ERA says, equality of rights under the law shall not be denied or abridged by this state or any of its political subdivisions on account of race, color, creed, sex, sexual orientation, gender identity or expression, age, disability, ancestry, or national origin. So I just want to point out those two because I know there's a lot of confusion about the state ERA versus the federal ERA. And the state ERA was passed in 2019. It then came back to be passed again in 2021. And now it will be on a state ballot in Nevada. So just, that gives kind of an overview of the two ERAs that we're dealing with. They are similar, but they're not exactly the same.
So Tess, question for you on the ballot measure, because that is something that you and I are going to be working together on. I'm super excited about it. What is that going to entail? When is that going to be on the ballot? And how is that all going to work? Because I think that's a really important thing. As you can all hear, our state ERA is so much, it wasn't created in the 70s. It was created, recently. And so it's so much more expansive and so much more inclusive of all people and different backgrounds and things like this. What is that process going to look like, Tess? And why is that important for us to do here?
Yeah. So actually 25 states right now have their own versions of a state ERA. So this is an equal rights amendment that's included in their state constitutions. Of course, we know that it's not in our federal constitution quite yet. We're working there, but a lot of states do have it enshrined in state constitutions. And so that's what we're working on here in Nevada. To get something on the ballot in Nevada, you have to pass it through 2 legislative sessions. So we have done those 2 steps, as I explained, which means the next step is to have it on the ballot. So it will be on your general election ballot in November 2022. It's a basic question. It just says, do we want to approve this or not? So throughout the next 8 months, whatever we have until the election, we really need to work on spreading the word so people understand what they're voting on. As we know, ballot questions can be so confusing, and oftentimes people just don't even understand what they're voting on, what yes means, what no means, why it's on the ballot. So we're going to be doing a lot of work from now until the election to get people to understand what it means, and that voting yes on it just means that now these words that I already read will be enshrined in our state constitution. Doesn't affect the federal constitution, has nothing to do with the federal ERA that we passed, but it will get it enshrined in our state constitution.
And I think that's really important, as we've learned with the reproductive rights and abortion. That is, what a lot of our foremothers did to make sure that the right to abortion is legal and safe in Nevada when the rest of the country is now worried. Only 7 states have that, and we are one of them. So I think, looking to that as an example of why these things need to be enshrined in our state, if things fall federally, if shit hits the fan federally, this is our backstop. These are our backstops to ensure that our people in Nevada, all people in Nevada, are protected. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and I think that's a good way of putting it, is the idea that, like, okay, we don't have control over everything that's going to happen federally. And we can work really hard here in Nevada to, make sure Catherine Cortez Masto stays in office and make sure we keep people in office or elect good people, but we don't have complete control over that federal level. So the more we can protect here on our own state law is just for the win. So this is a fantastic protection. This is something we need in our state constitution. We've talked about abortion. We've talked about how Roe v. Wade right now is enshrined in state law. So we already have a little more protection here in Nevada, but we just want to keep adding to those protections. The other thing is, we don't know what the politics will look like here in Nevada as we continue to be a purple state. And as we've heard in the Republican debate that happened a few weeks ago, the informal Republican debate, people are talking about abortion and how we may want to pull back or make limitations to that, make limitations to other rights we have here in Nevada. So even our state laws our electeds are not necessarily going to be the same people that we have right now. So the more we can get protected in our state constitution, the better. And this is just an additional protection that we absolutely want to be passed this November.
Awesome. Maria, I want to come to you. So obviously, as advocates, we are working all the time on a host of different issues at the federal level, at the state level. Right now, we obviously have abortion rights, and it's even more present now with the vacancy in the Supreme Court that just came up this week. We are talking about the freedom to vote. Unfortunately, that failed last week. Build Back Better, which still hasn't passed, and working class people, all of Nevadans are counting on that right now. And there's so many other things, the pathway to citizenship, climate equity, all of those different critical issues that COVID-19 even, right? So why is it so critical that we continue working on the Equal Rights Amendment, the ERA, while we're still working on all these other issues? And what is the intersectionality of all of those issues with this?
That's a really great question. I feel like, honestly, let's be honest, right? The 19th Amendment granting women's suffrage is the only mention of the word woman in the U.S. Constitution. And that in itself is so problematic. Furthermore, it only guaranteed the right by federal law is the right to vote to women. And I do believe that the intersectionality to this is working class, and people of color and women and, like you mentioned earlier, the LGBTQ plus community. It's important to make sure that we continue uplifting them as well. And it's also important to realize that the ERA is an amendment for both men and women. It's not just a women's issue. So when we're talking about issue of custody and employment and fair wages, like those are all important to both sexes and to non-binary folks. But of course, there's people that you start mentioning it's a women's issue and they're like, oh, never mind, So definitely it would guarantee equal rights without regard to sex. And once again, very crucial for the LGBTQ plus folks. And definitely the intersectionality of it, like I mentioned, is working class immigrants and people of color. And honestly, it's about continuing to uplift them and ensure that we're not pivoting or putting communities against each other when we're trying to pass something so important and so crucial as the ERA, as Build Back Better, as the pathway to citizenship, and continue protecting abortion rights.
So I'm glad you brought up, especially, BIPOC people of color. Historically, as somebody who has studied the women's movement, feminism a lot of times, especially early feminism, left out so many people, right? And it left out trans women, it left out people who are non-binary, it left out people of color, disproportionately women of color. And my question always is, as we continue this journey with the Equal Rights Amendment and it being so crucial to so many people, but especially people of color, women of color, how do we as feminists, we as a movement, do a better job making sure that BIPOC people, their voices are included in this movement as we continue forward with this?
One of the biggest things that I do like to emphasize so much is that there's no community without a voice, right? There's no voiceless community. And I think that a lot of it does come because people are afraid to speak up sometimes. And it is about making people feel comfortable and allowing them. It's not so much making them, but allowing them to feel comfortable in those spaces. So I'm a huge advocate for language accessibility. I think language accessibility is one of the most important things. Like, you cannot tell an older Latina to vote for the Equal Rights State Amendment if they don't understand what it is, if there's no campaign addressing them directly in a language that they understand. And I'm a huge advocate for keeping everything at a 5th grade reading level. Like, I'm a huge advocate for that. I speak both English and Spanish. My parents growing up, they were very big on like, do not speak English at home, because I was growing up with my grandparents. I'm very thankful for that now, but not everybody had that, right? Like, not everybody had those parents. I mean, my younger sister, like, she understands Spanish and she knows how to read it, but she doesn't know how to pronounce it sometimes. So once again, it's about keeping things at a 5th grade reading level, ensuring that the things are not just directly translated, but translated in a way that it's comprehensible for our communities. And also just continuing to uplift the woman of color, and specifically Senator Pat Spearman, who's an amazing Black woman who spearheaded the ratification of ERA in 2017. I mean, we definitely have to give credit to women of color where it belongs. And of course, to white women too, who are great allies as well, uplifting them. And it's just continuing to understand each other to ensure that we're highlighting those women of color, but also meeting women of color and POC and LGBTQ folks where they're at, and not expecting them to come to us, especially, like I said, especially if things are not in a language that they understand.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with that, Maria. One of the things that I think is really important is also talking to younger folks about this issue. I am rapidly approaching middle age at this point. I think you're probably the youngest one amongst this group at this point, not to age all of us, but a lot of young people maybe don't realize that equality in our Constitution is not guaranteed to people who are not specifically white men, right? Our Constitution was written for white men, period, end of story. And our Constitution was written on racism and sexism and all of the other isms that exist out there. So for me, why is it so important that younger folks understand the importance of this issue? Because for me, I got into this work because young people around me didn't necessarily understand that, access to birth control was a right. It's not. It is a right, but it can be taken away at any time. Access to abortion is not guaranteed to all of us. And so what can we be doing better to also make this accessible to young folks?
So I was actually just having this conversation today, and I was talking about how the voting age is getting younger, and it's getting so much younger. But at the same time, and I'm going to specifically talk about Latinos, at the same time, there's so many older Latinos that finally want to adjust for citizenship and are finally going to be able to have the chance to vote. So you start talking to young Latinos to inform them, because it's going to be their first time, registering to vote and voting in an election. And you're meeting them where they're at high schools, informing them about everything that's going on. And like you said, birth control is a right, but at the same time, it's not. Like, it can be taken away anytime. And I don't think people fully understand that. And we've grown in a privileged life, but at the same time, unprivileged. And it's like people don't understand, there's just that very fine line. And in educating the young community, the young Latinos, the young POC, they're also informing the older generation. And they're also like being like, hey, guess what I learned in school today? Or like, I had this really cool internship at a nonprofit and they're talking about the ERA. Like, do you know what it is? Like, did you know that it was up for the ballot in Nevada this upcoming election? And then it also brings families together. So yes, I know. I think it was just so funny that you brought up this question because I was literally talking about it today.
Well, and I think it feels, Jeri, I'm sorry, but like, for many of us, this just feels like a no-brainer. Like, what do you mean we're not equal under the law? What do you mean we don't have the same rights as my husband, right? What do you mean I couldn't have a bank account before, the 1970s in my own name? Like, what? But we, like you said, Maria, we grew up with privilege. We grew up only knowing these things, only knowing that we could have control over our bodies, only knowing that we could have, control over our own money and have a job where I do make more than my husband, right? That was unheard of previously. And so that's a really big deal that I just don't know that, because we've just grown up with this stuff, that young people maybe understand or realize.
And yes, I mean, you really think, and I'm going to put my family as a clear example. My mom is a manager at a supermarket, and I'm very, very happy. And I've seen how far she gets. And, it's really like a dream and a life goal to get there. And my mom, when she first came to this country, like, she didn't think that she would make it past being a cashier. So growing up, when she became the manager, I was like, oh my God, this is so cool. But then, my first job was at a fast food restaurant. I'm not going to mention names, but it was at a fast food restaurant. And I really saw the disproportionate between supervisors and like all the younger women were in the lower, I was about to say the restaurant, but they were definitely in lower positions. So I was like, okay, something's not right here. And it's in doing research, and I've also was not involved in politics or the nonprofit in high school due to my immigration status. But once again, like, it is about not having that information, right? Like, not having that accessibility of, I can get involved in politics and the nonprofit world besides voting. And it is by continuing to uplift not just myself and look at my barriers as staircases instead, but also my community, uplifting my community and not forgetting, honestly, like, where I came from.
Absolutely. Jeri, I know you wanted to jump in on this, and we're going to come back to you anyway. So okay. you want to weigh in on this one?
Well, there was a couple of things I was thinking. I know Zoe Nicholson is a friend of mine. She's an ERA activist in Long Beach. And whenever she talks about the ERA, she hands them a little pocket constitution and says, find women in this. And the young women in the college, they have no idea. And that's when they realize they're not in there. But I also wanted to mention that women of color have been leading the way since Pat Spearman in Nevada. In Virginia, Hala Ayala and Jennifer Carroll Foy were both the sponsors of the ERA in Virginia, and they're younger and women of color. So, it is starting to become that. And then Carol Jenkins is head of the ERA coalition, and she, so it's changing. That's what I wanted to say.
And it has to change, right? We have to make movement on that, because it can't just be white women leading this charge anymore. One of the things, Maria, just really quickly, I'm going to come back to you, and then I'll go back over to Jeri. Just because you were talking about language accessibility, I realized we were using an acronym maybe not all of our viewers know. Can you tell us what biPOC is and why that acronym is so important now in our movement?
Yes. And honestly, and thank you, honestly, for calling me out on that, because I think, calling me in, right? I think it's very important, because we do mention acronyms a lot, and ERA, Equal Rights Amendment, and then we get into it because we know this stuff. So BIPOC stands for Black, Indigenous, and People of Color. And it's very important when we're talking about progressive spaces, because we need to make sure that we're continuing to bring people in who are BIPOC, who are Black, Indigenous, and People of Color, and just ensuring that we're not shutting them out of these conversations, in which, as we know, Black and Latina women are the ones that that see the disparity higher in equal wages, right? Like Latina women are at 54%, and I believe Black women are at 62%. I might be wrong on that one. So if I am, I will correct it when we come back. But I mean, that is exactly why it's important. And just like I said, no one is voiceless. It's about just making sure that we're passing the mic and allowing people to feel comfortable.
Absolutely. Thank you for that, Maria. And I did it too. And I realized it and I was like, oh crap, we gotta make sure everybody knows what we're talking about. So thank you for helping me with that. Jeri, I want to come back to you and talk specifically about the Supreme Court. We've already talked about that a little bit, but it's such a kind of looming issue that all of us are just surrounded by constantly right now. So the Supreme Court will soon have a new vacancy as of this week. We talked a little bit about that earlier. And the headlines are bringing up President Biden's promise to nominate a Black woman for the bench, which I fully support and think it's way past time for us to do. What do you hope to see in a new nomination from President Biden? And what are you hoping for in terms of a process, especially in light of what we've seen with the nonsense in the Senate around Build Back Better, around the Voting Rights Act, which is incredibly important to this issue as well? What are you hoping to see from that process?
Well, I think one of the things I heard today is it's probably good timing because it's not election year. You can't say that it's election year and hold it up. I mean, not to say that they won't try, but we're, obviously the first thing we want to do is make sure he keeps his promise. And we heard President Biden say today that that would be the case and that they would have a nominee announced soon and hopefully within 30 days, have the process. We'll see how that plays out. Some of the possibilities, are pretty exciting. Women and Black women, as promised. There was what I was looking at, the Ketanji Brown Jackson. I guess she said in an opinion that about the Trump administration that presidents are not kings and she wouldn't rule in a partisan way. And, she sounded kind of, like somebody I would I would pick. But then I also saw that Clyburn, Representative Clyburn, who asked Biden, to include, to make this promise, is looking at Judge Michelle Childs. And so that's, I think, the other one. And then there's a young woman, Leandra Kruger, and she's the younger, I think she's like 45 and has mostly state experience. And so all three look great. And let's just hope we can get this done quickly. And we know, again, back to the ERA, we know the ERA is probably going to end up in front of the Supreme Court. We want to get some good people in place.
Yeah. And Jeri, we talked a little bit, both you, I think all three of us, or all three of you on the panel tonight have talked about our legislature and the fact that it is female majority. We do have a great deal of people of color in our legislature as well. Why does that representation, and this does relate to the ERA very, very closely, why does that representation on the court and the diversity of thought on the court especially matter, especially when it comes to issues related to race and gender and discrimination and things like that?
Well, I think you said it best. It sets that tone and the experiences that women have, BIPOC women, as we were saying. But I wrote down an RBG quote in case we talked about this, that she said, when I'm sometimes asked, when will there be enough women on the Supreme Court? She said, when there's 9. And she said, people are shocked, but there've been 9 men all along and nobody ever raised a question about that. And we do know in our legislature and with our senators, our US senators, that women do make a difference. We just do. When you talk to the senators that in Carson City, and the legislators, they said that just the tone changed, the type of bills changed, and women have a tendency to run for office or as a judge, to make, change in society where men have a tendency to, to get somewhere we just obviously feel it's really important to have at least half the Supreme Court women. So, and it's held true with the women who are on the court. So, well, all but one.
Tess, I want to bring you in on this. You know, you and I, like I said, have worked up at the legislature for a long time. Your mentor was the first female chief of staff for a governor in the state of Nevada. So we know that having strong female leaders, especially as mentors and as people teaching kind of younger generations and bringing them up with them, makes a huge difference. So talk to me about why the change in Carson City with a female majority has made such a difference in the laws and legislation that has moved forward, and why you think, having a Black woman on the Supreme Court would make such a difference.
Yeah, it's huge. And we might as well just say Marlene Lockard, my mentor, first female chief of staff, one of the first female lobbyists in the building. And she's got some great stories, I just have to say, because I think when we talk about the ERA and the importance of equal rights, people kind of brush it off. They have this feeling of like, well, like, why is it important? It's not that big of a deal. Women are equal. I have a lot of men actually that tell me this constantly, like, women are equal. What's the big deal? And it's frustrating because then you can look at the stats and you can be like, okay, but women still make less. BIPOC women make even less than white women. So there are definitely still differences. And then even talking to Marlene and some of her stories when she first entered the legislative building and how legislators wouldn't talk to her because she was a woman and they said she didn't belong there and lobbyists shouldn't be, so there's countless stories of times that aren't that long ago when women were clearly not equal. I think we've made huge strides, but there are still huge strides to be made for all LGBTQ and transgender individuals, and not just women, but a whole bunch of populations that we still need to make progress on. And so then that ties in this idea of representation and how important that is. And we need people that have lived different experiences, not just, the white male experience. And so that at the end of the day is why it's so important to have a Black woman in our Supreme Court. But I will also say that having lived through these past 3 sessions at the Nevada legislature, how many more bills we've gotten through that are about women. And I should say, not just about women, actually, about all genders, but people kind of labeled them as women's bills, and they are really, really important for equality. And so, we've had bills to do with pay equality, maybe not asking about salary history, bills to do with paid time off, bills to do with access to birth control. And so, all of those, we've gotten so many of those through because we've had so many women in our legislature. I don't think we would have passed many of those bills or even heard many of those bills had it not been for the majority of women that were sitting in those seats saying, hey, these are topics that are important. Yeah, we do actually want to talk about breastfeeding, and we do want to talk about tampons, because these are really important issues that maybe men aren't feeling comfortable about talking about a tampon in a hearing, but women are sitting there saying, these are issues that we need to address, and we need to talk about these so that we can change policy.
Absolutely.
So I think that state level can connect to all levels of government, but that includes the Supreme Court.
Yeah, I think that's really important. And, working on women's issues for the past several years, back when I worked for Planned Parenthood, and now, we're in year 3 of this pandemic. So we're going into an election year. We know that ERA is going to be on our ballot here in Nevada. What do you think the other issues are that Nevadans should be paying attention to that have to do with equality, have to do with, equal rights, and making sure that all people have equal rights under the law?
Mm-hmm. So of course, we've talked about the ballot question, but it's also a really big election year. And it's a big election year in a bunch of down ballot races that aren't just our state governor or our state senate. So I think, and I wanted to just make a plug for this, the importance of looking at all levels of government, because so much happens at those lower levels, and the state level, so many issues are brought there. And I think there will be things that we see this next session, somewhat depending on who gets elected. So as we've heard, there have been certain threats to abortion. And so we want to make sure we prevent anything from moving on those threats to abortion. But there are also other things, especially that the women's lobby wants to work on. Childcare, that has become a major, that's been a major issue. It continues to be a major issue, and the pandemic only made it that much worse. And we've seen that the pandemic affected women more than other groups of people because women maybe had to stay home with their children, and that's sort of stereotypical, but we also saw that happened a lot. And so addressing childcare barriers. We also want to talk about paid time off and ensuring that all employees are getting a certain level of paid time off. It was something that was passed in 2019, but there are certain employers that have found a loophole, and they're declaring that federal holidays are actually what they're going to give their employees as that paid time off. So maybe they now get Thanksgiving off. They always had Thanksgiving off. Now Thanksgiving is their paid day off, though, rather than getting the holiday that they would have already gotten. So that's something that the women's lobby is going to work on. And then also looking at minimum wage. So we know that we have passed a minimum wage and it's going up every year, but it could also be a ballot measure to ensure that everyone in 2024 will make $12 an hour. The bill that was passed that raised the minimum wage makes it so that you will get $12 an hour, but if your employer gives health benefits, then they could give $11 an hour. And so this ballot measure would ensure that everyone, the lowest minimum wage is $12 an hour, independent of whether your employer is giving you health benefits. So,
and just so people know, that will be on the ballot in 2022 as well. So just, it qualified for 2022, right, Tess?
Yes, it did.
Sure. Yeah, so it'll be on the ballot with the Equal Rights Amendment, the state Equal Rights Amendment this year as well.
Yes.
Feels like yesterday we were working up there trying to get all of this done. So before I move to, because I really do want to spend a few minutes on abortion, because I do think that's such an important piece of all of this, especially in light of the news about the Supreme Court this week. You know, Jeri, I want to come back to you. How do folks, and I should say for our viewers at home, if you have questions, put them in the chat. Now is a great time to do that. We will get to questions in just a few minutes. We want to make sure that you understand why the Equal Rights Amendment is so important and why this topic is so critical even now. So please put your questions in the chat. We're taking questions. Our team is going to get those over to me. So Jeri, I want to ask, you know, Nevada Now is a part of the National Organization of Women. You all have been on the ground for a very long time. I was involved with you all years ago. I've been involved with the women's lobby for a long time. Talk to us about how you get involved with both the ratification of the national ERA, but also the work here on the ground that's happening around getting this state ballot measure through and passed so that we can have a state ERA as well.
Yeah, so the state ERA will be working with hoping to work with Tess and you as well. I think the key is going to be the language of the state ERA and the types of people, organizations that will be interested in working with. So, you know, one of them is age and LGBTQ issues and race, where, you know, the federal ERA, you know, is very specific to gender. So we're really hoping to get, you know, everyone involved and educated to pass this. I think it's really important.
So how do people get involved with that work, and how do folks get in touch with you at Nevada Now?
Okay, so we have a website, nevadanow.org, and we do have committees. This year, 2022, we're working on constitutional equality. Another big one is menstrual equity, which falls in line with, you know, what we were talking about. We worked on the bill to get period products in schools, and we have we're working on a dignity for incarcerated women committee, looking to maybe having a bill. You know, so those are the things that we'll be working on with Nevada Now going forward. So I don't know if that answers your question. We are on Facebook and Twitter at Nevada Now. You know, so we hope that people will get involved, and we're all volunteer. So we get donations and membership through the National Now, and that's how we do a lot of our work. So we're working with Mass Lib right now on the menstrual equity bill that we're working on too. So we like working in coalition with groups on these issues, because really there's all the different core issues for now pretty much cover it. You know, we always say there isn't an issue that isn't a women's issue. So
absolutely. And Tess, and Jeri, I just wanted to show you something. I have my ERA sticker here.
Yeah,
I got this during session a couple years back. So I got my little ERA. I saw your purse and stuff behind you. So
yeah,
you know, gotta say yes for the ERA. So
okay, so I have to get up and show you one thing.
It's super cute. I saw it behind you and I was like, oh, I have to grab mine. Oh, it's a little tambourine. That's cute.
So Carolyn Maloney, when she went to the Met Gala, carried a tambourine made with the ERA on it, and someone made that. Well, Zoe made that for me. So we all have to have our bling.
Awesome. So Tess, I want to move to you and Maria. Tess, tell us how folks get involved with the Nevada Women's Lobby, because y'all do excellent work as well, North and South. So how do folks get involved and what's coming up for you all?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we are certainly very engaged at the legislature, hence our name, the Nevada Women's Lobby. And we do have a full-time lobbyist, which used to be Marlene. It's now me. I've stepped into those shoes. But we always want support. And so we need that in a couple different ways. One thing is that we are membership driven. So we always are looking for members. And part of that, we have monthly lunches, and I wanted to give a quick plug for our monthly lunch that's coming up this next Tuesday. It's Tuesday at 12 p.m. and we will actually be featuring someone talking about the ERA. Her name is AJ Conroy. She has been working on an amicus brief. I know Jeri's nodding her head because I think she's been working with a number of us, and she's going to give us, the Women's Lobby, an update. So one is that we have these monthly lunches and we love people to join. They're all on Zoom. We've had some really great speakers. We actually had Congresswoman Titus this month giving us an update on Build Back Better. So that's one thing. And then of course we will need support and engagement over these next 8 months to make sure we get the state ERA passed in November, come that election. And then come the legislature, there will be a number of women's issues. We always have our priorities, which is healthcare, access to healthcare, affordable housing, paid time off, pay equity. Those are all some of the Women's Lobby's priorities. So we will be working on all of those. We don't have any specific bills at this point that we are bringing forward, but we're working on those. And then come the legislature, we always have our Grassroots Lobby Day event, which helps teach citizen advocates how to lobby, how to go to the legislature. We all hope that next year it'll be in person, the event and the legislature in general, because we know this last session was kind of complicated. So really we're a grassroots lobbying team, and we love to get people involved and to get anyone actually affected by the issues to come talk about the issues and talk about the bills. So it's not just lobbyists sitting up there talking about someone else's experiences.
Yeah, I always say that they get tired of us yelling at them, especially like you and I. So let's get some other voices in there.
Absolutely.
Maria, you work for a new organization called Somos Nevada. Tell us a little bit about your new organization and the good work that you all are doing and what your plans are for the future, because I'm super excited about this.
Well, I can guarantee I might be a little more excited. But yes, so like I mentioned earlier, and like it was mentioned, I am the political director at Somos Nevada. So I really like Somos because Somos believes in the impact, in the impact of Latino voters, but also in the power of individual and collective political activism, which I mentioned earlier. Like, you don't have to be a citizen to get to be politically active. And also in the true celebration of an inclusive and unified Latinidad and community. At the heart of this, of course, is family, and our work serves generations of Latinos that has been ignored by American politics for far too long. We are a community of not just activists and political leaders, but everyday folks aiming to improve the material conditions of Latinos and of generations to come. This pandemic, and I know it's something that's always mentioned, I know in the previous Out in Front, I probably said it multiple times, but this pandemic really shined a light on everything that the Latino community goes through disproportionately. And it really sucks that it had to take a pandemic for people to see how much the Latino community suffers. And so it's definitely important to continue uplifting directly impacted voices, as I continue saying. And I feel like I've said it so many times that I know some people might be getting tired, but it's important to continue emphasizing that. So in order to get involved with this, we do have a website at somosvotantes.com. So please do reach out to get involved. Like I said, definitely want to emphasize that you do not have to be a citizen to be politically active. And that to me is the biggest thing, especially because even with DACA, I have DACA, and I feel like DACA is such a huge privilege because lots of folks can no longer get DACA. So it's always about finding ways for folks to get involved and allowing them to feel comfortable in our spaces. We will continue reaching out to the community and meeting the community where they are at, which is the most important thing, especially for such a crucial election year. Yes, and it is not a presidential year, so it's about informing and empowering the community to know that while it is not a presidential year, they still need to vote because it is a very, very important election, as I keep repeating. I mean, there's so many important things on the ballot as well. So yeah, just continuing to meet the community where they're at and allowing them to feel comfortable with us and with folks who partner with us as well.
Awesome. Thank you for that, Maria. And the links for all three organizations are in the chat right now. So if you just look in the chat, you can get information about all three of these amazing orgs and get involved with them because they're going to need your support this year. So Maria, I want to start with you on this question. I want to bring us back to abortion and then we'll get to our viewers' questions. This is something that we've been talking a lot about over the past couple of weeks. We just had the 49th anniversary of Roe versus Wade. I worked at Planned Parenthood. Abortion as an issue is probably the issue that's nearest and dearest to my heart. It's one of the most important things I feel I have the privilege of working on every single day. I am incredibly worried about abortion, the right to abortion, the right to safe and legal abortion. How do you think the ERA helps us protect the right to abortion? And how does abortion as an issue kind of tie back to this whole thing that we're talking about tonight? Equality, autonomy over people's bodies, making sure people have the rights to control their own destiny. What are your thoughts on this issue, especially in light of the Supreme Court issues?
So, we know that the war on abortion is not a war on rich women. It's a war on the working class woman, and it's ensuring that people and I'm trying to find a way to phrase this, but it is about getting resources to those communities, to working communities, to BIPOC communities, to Latino communities, to immigrant communities. And I feel like if we cannot get the ERA passed, which of course, knock on wood and hope, everything that it passes, we cannot get the ERA passed, which already has the 38 states, like how are we going to continue looking at our community in the eyes and being like, yes, abortion is safe, the abortion rights is safe. And it's about ensuring that we continue the fight for ERA because it really does go hand in hand. It is an attack on BIPOC communities. It is an attack on working class communities. And honestly, I feel more motivated to continue this fight because it will allow women and non-binary folks to not feel like they have to take the day off and now they're losing and not only what they would make in a day to go get a safe and legal abortion, but also they would be losing that plus the 54% in comparison to a white man taking the day off, So it really makes this huge difference. And we're talking about housing too, BIPOC communities have to work extra hard to make sure that they have a roof over their head. And it's really sad. And especially with this rent crisis, this rent increases that just keep going up. How does one apartment go from $900 to $1,500 something in the course of a year? It's ridiculous. And it is that BIPOC communities and working class families have to work double, triple than what the average white man does.
Thank you for that, Maria. Tess, I want to bring you in on this question. Obviously, pregnant people need access to abortion, period. It just shouldn't even be a question. This is a healthcare choice. This is basic healthcare. It should be no question at all. But obviously, this is continues to be a question because of control and all the things that Maria just said. So why is it so important that when we're thinking about the Equal Rights Amendment, that we continue to think about abortion rights as part of that? There you go. Tess, you're on mute.
You'd think I'd know. Two problems. I have two answers for you. So one, I want to be a little bit careful when we talk about abortion and ERA, because while we are fighting for equal rights, many of the people who have been opposed to the ERA say it will guarantee abortion. And so I just want to be a little bit careful when we're talking about that, because I also don't want it to become a talking point that we're going to pass the ERA, therefore all abortion for all people at any time can now get abortions. Because that has been brought up time and time again. And if you go look at the testimony in, all years, 2017, 2019, 2021 at the legislature, there were people that came up multiple times and said, well, we can't pass this because this will allow anyone to get an abortion at any time. So while I do, we want to actively support access to abortion and pro-choice legislation, I want to make sure we're not saying that, the ERA is automatically going to give us that. That said, it does absolutely provide some additional protections. And Maria touched on a few of those that are bigger picture items, but, paid time off and equal pay. And all of those help give women access to abortion rights and just the ability to choose the care they need, which ultimately is part of a pro-choice, power over our bodies and the ability to make a decision that if you don't want to have a child, or if you're not at a time in your life where you're capable of a child, then you have options so that you can go get the care that you do need. And so the ERA can help give us access to that, but at the same time, it is not guaranteeing access to abortion, at any time. And I want to not directly connect those too much, just because that is such a powerful comment that comes from populations that don't want to pass the ERA in opposition to the ERA.
Yeah. And Tess, I'm really glad you brought up the opposition on this, because so often I think that is conflated, right? Is one equals the other, and that's simply not true. We have the access to abortion in Nevada, not because of the ERA, because of, again, what we did with question 1, and that's codified in the Nevada revised statutes. It has nothing to do with the ERA. But I want to talk just generally about healthcare, right? So take abortion out of this for a second. The ERA is important, though, to other things, right? It is important for equal access, like you said, to be able to, even go, at one point, women would have to get permission to go to the doctor for just general things. So how does, especially when we're talking about equality under the law, when it comes to just controlling our bodies, controlling our healthcare, not connected to abortion, why is it important for that aspect, I think, in terms of like just equality generally with healthcare?
Yeah, Jeri, I feel like you may have a bigger answer to this than I even do.
Well, when you said that women didn't used to have a choice, I mean, women had to get the okay from their husband to get their tubes tied or a hysterectomy back in the day. So, we certainly don't want to go back to that. But they had a press conference this morning, and Representative Maloney said, and so I'm going to kind of take the other side of this, Tess. She said that she knows the ERA is needed for abortion rights because of the threat to Roe, and the laws and states will stand in the way of women's right to make her own decisions. I think we've been too careful in this area. We worked in Arizona to try to get them to be the 38th state. We worked in Virginia, didn't pass the first time around because they had more Republicans than, they did. They had people who didn't vote for it. And then once they had people who, supported our issues in Virginia, it passed. And they didn't allow people like NARAL and Planned Parenthood to be involved with the ERA in Virginia or in Arizona. And it really, there's no other way to put it, it wouldn't have mattered. They weren't going to vote for the ERA, that they were against it. They were against the ERA and they were against abortion. So I think we've been really careful. And I heard, when hearing Representative Maloney say that this morning, made me realize, I think we're taking those gloves off and that it will make a difference for women and all, people. I mean, this affects men too, being able to get an abortion. I wish men were held with more, responsibility. And I think we wouldn't be having this conversation if they did. But so I think, the ERA will give everyone the rights to their body and to, they said it was central to gender equality. And so I think it does have something to do with it. And I think we've been too careful.
Well, and I think, Jeri, on that point, we work on a project called Abortion Out Loud. I think for a long time, the women's issue movement and reproductive justice, reproductive rights movement has been afraid of the word abortion. And it's something that really chaps my ass, to be quite honest, because we should not be ashamed of that word. We should not be ashamed of making sure that all people, pregnant people, have access to safe and legal abortions. I am not shy about that fact. I do not, shy away from that word, because I think it's so important. And so I do think it's something we need to start thinking about in our movement, is how are we talking about these issues, and how are these issues intersectional? And yeah, maybe we have been a little too careful for too long, and maybe it's time for us to take off the gloves like the right does and just do some damn things, because that's what they do. And they don't ever care about what the message is or whose feelings are heard. They don't care about any of that.
Well, and we had a program on reproductive rights and abortion, and Poppy Northcutt is the president of Texas now. And she kind of popped on, and we were surprised. She's really amazing. You have to look her up. You have to Google her, because she's amazing with the NASA. So she said that what was going on in Texas really didn't have to do with abortion. It had to do with the fact they were turning blue. And this was an issue to get people out to vote. And so they certainly use it. And, maybe I'm hoping that we don't want this to happen with Roe, but that young women will realize what this means. Like you were saying earlier, most young women don't know what that even looks like, to not have the choice to and even my age, I was able to get birth control and have my own choices at 63 years old when I was young. So it's been a long time since we've had these rights, and that they go away. I think young women just don't know what that looks like.
Absolutely. Okay, I do want to get to a couple viewer questions. We're going to go a few minutes over, if that's okay, because we got a lot of questions from our chat, and I want to make sure we get to some of them. So if the three panelists, y'all can just pop in whenever you feel like. It's open to all three of you. So I'm not going to go in any kind of order. So our first question comes from Amber, and I think we've already kind of answered it, but just to touch on it again, because I do think it's really important. I know Maria really talked about this. How will the ERA help working class women specifically? Tess, you want to start?
I'll go. Sure. Well, working class women are facing some significant challenges that can be resolved by the ERA, or at least helped by the ERA. We've talked about healthcare and access to healthcare, and we've talked about paid time off. And we know that things like paid time off and equal pay affect lower class individuals more than upper class. Most people who are making a decent wage probably have paid time off. But some of the people that I work directly with are home care workers, and home care workers are significantly BIPOC. They also make an average of $11 an hour, and many of them don't get paid time off. And they are also spending money for their own training, spending money on transportation to their different clients. So they're some of the lowest wage workers that will be directly impacted by something like an ERA that's creating equality of gender, and will ultimately help them get some of the rights they need. Like I said, paid time off, access to healthcare, and equal pay in general.
Awesome. Thank you for that. All right. Paula asks, this seems like such an obvious decision. Why is there opposition, and why hasn't it passed? Jeri, you want to take that one?
Well, yeah, I think Tess talked about it too. Various reasons. I honestly don't, it doesn't seem like that controversial to me. So I'm kind of like stumped for why. We know the usual, women will have to serve in the military. Well, they already do. You'll have to use the same bathroom. Well, they already, we have gender neutral bathrooms, there's all the things that we hear when we look back at the testimonies from different people, or when you heard in Virginia. These things are, they're just not even things that are a good argument, but they're there. And Tess, what are just some of the other ones? I know you've looked at some of the testimony that come to mind.
Yeah, well, because I think that we should just point out, like, to us, it feels really straightforward. And it is like, why would you not pass this? I will tell you, in the hearings, the first hearing, there was far more opposition testimony than support testimony. I think 2017, people were really excited and there was a ton of support testimony. By 2021, people stopped caring, but the opposition didn't stop caring, and they came out in full force. And they had, I don't remember quite how long it was, an hour, 2 hours, some pretty long length of opposition testimony where they're talking about the draft. They're talking about bathrooms and how they don't want to use the dirty men's restroom because that's always so much dirtier than the women's. They're talking about the transgender issue and how people shouldn't be transgender was a lot of the opposition testimony, which, we can, I don't even want to talk about that, but that's something that people are saying all consistently, talking about sports teams and how they're concerned about that, so there's a lot of opposition testimony. And I don't want to downplay that when we feel like, oh, this is just a slam dunk. Like, a lot of people are out there that don't want to pass the ERA and don't think it's needed. And then, of course, there's the population that just thinks it won't do anything. And so why pass a symbolic measure? Why to go to all these efforts to pass something that isn't needed?
All right, Maria, I want to come to you next for this question. Steve Horner asks, how do we reach out and grow allies with older white males? The opponents of the ERA are very good at demonizing the supporters, especially young people of color.
So obviously I changed a little bit my location, but I think one of the biggest things is just ensuring that, once again, we're reaching out to people, we're advocating. I mean, no one knows the issues more than directly impacted people. And an example that I was using earlier today was, you start thinking about DACA recipients, for example, and you think Mexicans, like you think Latinos. And that's not the case. That's not, like, DACA recipients are not monolithic, and people who go through these issues, who need help, need the ERA to pass, are not just women. And I think that's one of the things too, and kind of circling a little back to the previous question, is people hear, oh, women, like it's gonna help women, and they think that for some reason it means that it's gonna be detrimental to men, and that's not the case. So it's really about addressing the facts, because yes, the opposition does have a really great way to reach out and demonize people. But I mean, and I feel like I'm being repetitive at this point, so apologies for that. But it really is just about putting a face to people who go through these issues and having people realize that it's not a monolithic issue. It's not just a women's issue. And like I mentioned earlier, the ERA is an amendment for both men and women. So it fixes the issue of custody, of employment, of fair wages, which are both important to both sexes, not just to women.
Thank you for that, Maria. So I think, for folks who want to get involved, we'll take anybody at this point. So if you're an ally, we need you too, right? We need the Nick Marquardts, my husband, out there shouting from the rooftops too, because we need everybody to get this done. Jeri, I want to come to you for this last question from our audience. And I think it's a really important one to kind of round out the night. Dawn, one of our fabulous supporters, she asked, my mother fought for this in the 70s. It's maddening that we have to pick this up again and fight again still. And I feel that way about a lot of issues. What is different now that will help us win this time? And I want to go out with a little bit of hope. What makes you think we're going to actually win this one this time, both at the state level and the federal level? And how can people get involved?
Well, I felt really hopeful this morning when I heard, when President Biden won, we thought we had it. And then, we got Georgia and we were like, this is it. And it stalled for a year. But, we've got the Congress behind us. We've got President Biden behind us. And now, the Senate. I feel hopeful, hearing from young people, hearing from Maria, and also hearing from men. I mean, like Annette, my husband's very supportive. I think that the good men realize this is equality for all. It'll help everyone. And I really, we wouldn't still be doing this if we didn't think it was hopeful. I mean, it seems like we're on the edge. We just need to push it over the finish line, and we need everybody to help. What we've been telling people is to call President Biden and ask him to, get the archivist to publish it, to call your senators. Ours are good, but you can call and thank them, and, stay involved. And we have postcards on our website you can send to the archivist and to the Department of Justice, and all hands on deck. Senator Spearman always says that we need everybody to come up with different ideas. We're just right there. And I think it'll really make a difference in our country for everyone. So I'm hopeful, or I wouldn't keep fighting this fight. It's, it's my passion.
Well, thank you for that. I want to close this out. Thank you for all the great questions in the chat. We had a lot tonight, so there's tons more we could have gotten to, but we kind of covered most of them already. So Maria, I'm going to start with you because I know you're outside of the UNLV library right now because they closed it on you. Just full disclosure for our viewers at home, she hung with us and found a new location while UNLV kicked her out. Maria, what are your final thoughts on this, and why do we need to get this done?
So they definitely did try to warn me that they were going to close the libraries. I do want to give them that, but I was like, I can't leave them. Like, we're still doing this. But I think that definitely, I want to end up on a note that once again, the ERA is not just an amendment for women, it's for both men and women. And just continue to emphasize that, because yes, the opposition will continue to demonize young voters and young Latinas and young leaders, and just continuing to uplift those young leaders and continuing to mentor them is the most important part, because people do have a voice. We just need to make sure that we're uplifting them and allowing them to feel comfortable. So I think my biggest thing is that just continuing to share spaces with young BIPOC people and people who were scared to join the movement at first, because it's a very crucial time for voices to be heard and to be continually uplifted.
Will from my team, Maria, wants you to know that you're truly capturing the spirit of Out in Front right now, since, this started because I was kicked out of the legislature. So I really want you to know that you are taking one for the team tonight. You are a part of this movement with us, and you are capturing the spirit of Out in Front.
Thank you.
All right, Tess, final words for us tonight.
Yeah, I guess I feel like being newer to Nevada politics, I entered it at a really exciting time. And there continues to be so much excitement and momentum here in Nevada. And so I just want to encourage people to continue to capitalize on that throughout this next election process. It's not a presidential year. It's still a huge year. We know it in Nevada when it comes to a number of our races, governor, Senate, and then everything below that. So I just want to, we've got so much momentum. Let's just keep that momentum going. We will absolutely pass the ERA here in Nevada. I say that optimistically, but I also think there's a good opportunity to do so. We can pass it here in Nevada in November. We'll get it passed federally, and then come 2023, we'll have another really awesome legislative session here in Nevada that prioritizes issues that affect all genders and everyone here in our state.
Thank you, Tess. And Jeri, last but not least, send us out with some hope, Jeri.
Well, I have a lot of hope. Like I said, I've been working with women who've been doing this for 40, 50 years, and new women, young women who were involved, and young men who were involved. We had Sean from DSA there with us at our rally tonight. We have an enthusiastic group of people who are working on this. We could use your help. Get involved. If this is like, you have a lot of people in the chat. If you want to do something, let one of us know. And Nevada Now is going to be carrying this issue on the state level and the federal level until we get this passed. So thanks so much for having me. I'm excited about it.
Awesome. Thank you, Jeri. All right. And for all of our viewers at home, I just want to highlight, we are going to be talking about all of this and more at our upcoming Progressive Summit Our Progressive Summit is going to be virtual statewide. We don't want to have a super spreader event, so we are doing it virtual again this year. We moved the Progressive Summit back a month this year because we didn't have legislative session. We didn't want to interfere with Chinese Lunar New Year this year. So we're moving it back, and it's going to be February 26th and 27th, virtual statewide. All of the information is going to be in the chat. Many of these lovely faces are going to be a part of the Progressive Summit. So we would love to have you join us at the Progressive Summit. All of the information will be in the chat. You can get your tickets now. We're going to have some amazing speakers we're going to be announcing soon. So you are not going to want to miss this. It's always incredible to be at the Progressive Summit. It's such a fun, cool, inspiring place to be. So get your tickets now. It'll be the weekend of February 26th and 27th. And like I said, it'll be virtual and statewide. And if you want to sponsor, we also have sponsorships available. You'll see that stuff in the chat as well. So get your tickets for the Progressive Summit. That's how we're going to leave tonight. And remember, keep your masks on. COVID is still real. It is a real thing. That's why we're doing the summit virtually this year. Again, I just had it. You don't want it. So please get your boosters, wear your masks and keep yourself safe. So with that, we will be back out in front with you next week. Next week is Gun Violence Survivors Week. So we are going to have survivors on our panel talking about gun violence nationwide and here in Nevada. So hope you will join us next week at 5 p.m. So with that, thank you all so much for joining us every week on Out in Front. And I hope you have a great evening. Stay safe, everyone. Talk to you soon.